And you are welcome along to a very special edition of the Huddle Breakdown, where we're having a blast from the past, welcoming our friend and former colleague, Mr. Enda Cole. My goodness, this is like the Beatles coming out of retirement or something. I mean, this is going to be this is going to rumble the entire ecosystem of the Huddle Breakdown that this is occurring. So thank you for taking time. You're living in the future. This is like what, December 40th or something in Australia, or what's going on with you? You deserted us. You moved to this far off land, living in the future. So how is Enda Cole?
I'm very well. As you can see, I have I've changed location. I'm a little bit more red since the last time I was on the show. Let me just show you and the listeners or the viewers what the paycheck that the guys gave me to leave the show so that they could take it to far and bigger places bought me. So I have my own library up here, got a nice rooftop pool there. So like, if you think that podcasting is not a lucrative game, let me tell you something different, because I've made an absolute fortune out of you two lads, and it's been fun. It's been fun. I've been enjoying my retirement.
Clearly, I mean, my goodness, that's pretty amazing. I thought it was all Bitcoin wealth and money laundering that you were up to, but it's good to hear that the podcasting game is so lucrative. Well, we're not going to do like the standard fare for the weekly. We just want to catch up with you, understand, and doing, because I've stood in to a little bit of your role of this pre-production stuff. So I know that you have like a list of gripes, and this. Do you know what today is? This is Festivus. Do you know that today is Festivus? Are you familiar with that? Okay, so this could be the Enda gripes, the list of gripes for us and our guests over the last 6 months, as a kind of catch up and a celebration of Festivus. So, do you have your poll? Are you going to grab your metal poll to give these to us?
You don't want to spend 50 minutes on the Dundee United game, no?
No, 50-mile-an-hour winds and 5 subs. No, not 50 minutes. No.
Yeah, so I actually do. I do have a list, though. I do have a list, and it's not quite aimed at you guys, but it's been an interesting experiment leaving a show as the host where you actually have input, and if I disagree with something that is said, I can actually I can cut across and say, well, no, I disagree with that. Whereas when you're walking in the park in the sunshine and somebody brings up Liam Scales' mistakes, there's no way of me defending his honor anymore. So I've made a short list of things that I've disagreed over the last couple of months. The main question, though, is like, Alan, was I right or were you right about Liam Scales? Because I can't tell anymore.
No, it's complicated, isn't it? It appears that, I think Brendan was really might have been just using young Liam until something better came along. That's the way it looks anyway. Listen, Liam Scales, I think, has found a niche as a really good squad player, trusted squad player. He's done pretty well every time he's been in. But what we've got with Austin Trusty is just that bit more pace, slightly less defensive frailty on occasions, but you do lose some ball progression for sure. But I think against the higher level opposition, like, you're really looking for that recovery pace, especially in Europe. You have to have that. Every team you play is going to have a reasonable amount of pace in the forward line, so it just makes such a difference. I think the Aberdeen game was a bit of a shock. It was a top of the league clash, and Scales was kind of left floundering just after half time, and they broke on Celtic to score their first. I think it was their first goal, not the second. The first one, and I think just moments like that probably brought home that Scales has evolved and he's grown for sure. And I think, as I say, exceptional actually, the improvement in his passing. But there's certain things you can't improve, and that's one of them really. That's what Trusty brings. He brings I would say a better balanced physicality. He's a good one-on-one defender. He looks quite organised in himself in terms of his body shape and so forth. He's quite maybe a little bit of a stronger guy as well, and as I say, just that pace. So, but no, Scales has got a role, and I'm sure he'll play many games between now and the end of the season. So I think we're probably both right or both wrong, whichever way you want to look at it.
I'll, I'll fall on your side, Enda. I think you were more right ultimately. I add myself. Don't just say Alan. I throw my lot in with Alan, um, in having been skeptical, and I think the idea. What would it be? I guess 15 months ago, that Liam Scales would be even what Alan just described, meaning a not only having a place as a squad member, but a valued, important place as a squad member, where you don't, or at least this is how I feel, specifically domestically. Like, I don't have any kind of anxiety when he plays. I think that is a huge upside compared to what I thought. When we went into that derby 15 months ago with, what was it, him and was it Lagerbielke? I don't even remember, Navrosky or Welsh. I forget. It was one of those mixes
initially, because he gave away the ball for the first Rangers goal.
That's right. So when that mix came out, I was like, my God, this is Armageddon. And yeah, so I think now what I will say is you Irish people need to be careful, because, when you replace an American like Trusty at halftime, you run the risk of a Mr. Trump invading. These are trigger happy times coming up in the next few weeks. So just be careful with this stuff, with supplanting Mr. Trusty with Scales. So just watch what you wish for there. And
he wants Greenland and Ireland, the annexation of Greenland and Ireland. Yeah,
they're awful close on the map
between the two.
Probably not.
No, it's funny on the Liam Scales, because the ultimate, this is just the fickle nature of football, isn't it? Is that he's actually probably good enough to start now. Whereas, like, at times, I'm willing to admit, last season or over the course of the last couple of years, like he probably wasn't. Like, there were obvious frailties with him. And now the funny nature of football is that he's improved to the point of everyone trusts him in the team now, except for the manager who has brought in his replacement, which I know he trusts him to throw him into games as a substitute and as a rotation player coming into the likes of the game at the weekend. But the funny nature of football is that he played an entire season where he probably wasn't good enough for the team. And now when he is, he's on the bench because we've got another player. And so it's funny how football works that way. The next thing I had was
it's a better outcome. It's a better outcome for Celtic, and we're all here for for the team effort, not for one individual. I think is
exactly. Well, my entire point with the Liam Scales thing was that everyone was shouting for Navrosky and for Lagerbielke and even at times Stephen Welsh, which is crazy thinking about it. But my whole point the entire time was that, if these guys are good enough, they'd be in the team. Like, if you guys seriously think that Liam Scales is playing every single week out of some weird spite that Brendan Rodgers had over the two signings that came into in a summer for the defence, or instead of Stephen Welsh, like, Liam Scales was there on merit. That doesn't necessarily mean that he was an exceptional player. It means he was there on merit of what we had in the club. And Austin Trusty is in there in merit now. He had to put Liam Scales out of the team. He did that. So it's up to Liam Scales now to come back and say, actually, you know what, I am a good option and you can trust me in the big games. And I think it's still interesting that Rodgers was willing to take Trusty off at halftime in the derby in order to get Liam Scales into the team, because he recognized that Trusty was giving nothing coming out of the defense, and they were getting pinned in as a result of his lack of ball progression, and Liam Scales was the better option. Like, I think you even seen it a couple of times this week. I know with the wind it was difficult, but he does have that defense splitting pass still, and he's now able to get the ball away a little bit quicker than he was. So that means that he's a good option. He definitely is. The next thing I had, I thought it was an interesting conversation more than a gripe, but was the 4-3-3 conversation you guys had with Quinny on the huddle breakdown extra time. So the main thing that I had on this was that, well, the 4-3-3 I think is a very interesting thing, because, like, for me, I don't get to talk about tactics a lot or I didn't, because I was, letting you guys do the thing. So I'm going to spill on here a little bit, because I'm not so much an analytics person, but I am a tactical person. Like I do like tactics. And the thing about football is about three things. It's about time, space, and movement. And you can't do anything without the three of those, because it just falls down. You kind of see it with games that Celtic fail to break the opposition down. They're missing one of those three things, or two of those three things. They're either not moving the ball quick enough, they don't have any space, or they're not moving to create that space. So you need all three of those working at the same time. And that's what the 4-3-3 is great, is that you can fill spaces a lot easier because you have more men in the positions that you're trying to move the ball. So it's easier to move because you're moving into a smaller space. The gaps are smaller. So that's the beauty of the 4-3-3. But Celtic don't really play a 4-3-3 if you look at the way that they play most of their games. Celtic play a 2-4-4. They play it like it's like one of the first ever tactics is the 2-4-4. And it's the way the Celtic set up. If you look at their shape most of the time, it's the two defenders sat on the D and the halfway line, and then everyone else is further up the pitch. You've got the two overlapping fullbacks going in. You've got the wingers cutting in narrow at times. You've got Kyogo practically not moving except for within the small area. Like, Celtic don't really play a 4-3-3. They might start in a 4-3-3, but that's not what they play.
Okay, so I guess I'm pretty skeptical about the whole notion of these kind of labels that people put on formations in any case, because in any what you should have, if you're going to be really correct about it, is, like you say, is you can almost have three labels that you apply to each team for each match. One is, how do they line up a kickoff? That's 4-3-3. Second is, what shape are they generally in when they have the ball, when they're attacking? And that, so Ange, that was like a 2-3-5. Maybe Rogers, maybe you might be right. It might be more of a 2-4-4, but I think it's probably it's not that far from 2-3-5 really, with Taylor being the sort of third, or McGregor being the third. And then what's your shape out of possession? And when Celtic are unless they're pressing, in which case there is only a basic shape for those at the back. Everyone else is responding to triggers and therefore not necessarily in a shape. But if Celtic are defending in a shape, it's probably 4-4-2. So there's three completely different shapes there, and they're all contextual, depending on whether you've got the ball, whether you've not got the ball. There is virtually no point in the game when Celtic are 4-3-3. I agree with that. I completely agree with that. But that's why I'm not beholden to those labels in any case. That's how I would use the labels. If I was tagging a game, that's how I would define it.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when Rodgers got appointed, he did a press conference for that game that was in Dublin. And because of that, I actually got to attend. And I asked him about his formations because he had kind of shifted to like a 4-2-3-1 during his time at Leicester. And I asked him what kind of shape he was going to play at Celtic. And like, he was kind of like that as well. And this is where I come back to like the time, the shape, and the movement. The space and the movement is that, like, he was saying, he doesn't really, like, there's no such thing as a 4-3-3. That's just a loose, broad term that we can understand as dumb monkeys who have evolved to kick a ball around a field. Like, we can see that there are three people in midfield and three people up front and four people in defence. Yeah.
Yeah, on the TV screen before the game starts, you need something symmetrical to put up. That's literally all it is, right?
Exactly, and that's essentially what he said. It was like, I mean, I technically play a 4-2-3-1, but it's more about covering space. It's more about, can I get people in the right channels? Can I get people in the right areas of the pitch? And that's kind of how Celtic play. It's like, it is technically a 4-3-3, and yes, they technically look like a 4-2-2 when they're defending. But really, it's just about covering the space and cutting out passing lines and making sure you're moving the opposition into the space that you want them to go when you're defending, and move them into space that you don't want them to, or they don't want you to go when you're attacking. So I found that conversation with the formations very interesting. So that wasn't so much a gripe. That was more, that was a conversation I would have liked to be a part of at the time.
Well, I'll chime in because I think that the more, for me anyway, what I find more interesting is kind of role definition in those different phases of play and the relative strengths and weaknesses of players to fulfill those roles. So, for example, when you see some of the tactical changes that Rodgers makes, like against Hearts, when we kind of came out in the second half and Hatate was dropping deeper to help in build up, like, is that a 4-2-3-1 then? Well, not really, because the attacking eight on the right, and I forget who it wasn't even it was even at the time, was still kind of populating that right half space channel that you would think is kind of normally the attacking eight place in a 4-3-3. So are you an offset 4-2-3? Right. So to me, the more interesting thing is, well, tactically, we were having trouble in build up. We needed to drop someone or maybe switch it up, not have Taylor in there, drop Hatate, and try to confuse the defensive setup. So to me, it's that interplay of the roles and what players are good at, and then the chess match between the managers as far as the tweaks that go on. And that's where I thought, the cup final was interesting, because there was a good bit of that heading into the second half, and the relative managers trying to outthink one another relative to the kind of the players being utilized in certain roles. So yeah, it's like a tactics for dummies like me, right? When you name things like 4-3-3 or something, it's like a nice conceptual summary. But Alan, did you want to correct me on something?
No, correct you at all. Just sort of hopefully enhance. But so, won't surprise you to know I keep a record of all of the what they call the player average position charts for the games. Now, I like these because I find them interesting. I'm skeptical as to what they're telling me, because I don't know, actually, even though they're called player average positions, I don't know if they're average positions or mean positions. I think I'd rather have the mean position, in all honesty, and I hope that's what it is, because if it was average, it'd possibly be very, very misleading. If it was mean, then that would tell me something. But anyway, I've just looked through the first 10 games of the season to ask in my head, thinking, what is the average? How would I describe the shape of using that average position? And actually, it's a 2-3-3-2. So there you go. Average positions are like a 2-3-3-2, but that's going to be a mixture of on the ball and off the ball as well. So it's just a bit of a schmuzzle. And you could probably argue, if you looked at the same things as I've just looked at, you might be able to draw the line slightly differently. But anyway, I just thought that was interesting.
Well, it's not only off the ball, on the ball, it's the different phases of play on the ball. So when we're in the attacking third, the shape's going to be different than if we're being high pressed in build-up.
Right? Or you're breaking, or you're defending a corner.
That's right.
And the problem with average positions as well is that it doesn't take into account when that is not the position that they're supposed to be in. So bad positioning.
All right, and I'll add you can get a book on this for your growing stack behind you, as you can look up a book on ergodicity. There, that's your homework for the week. That's an advanced analytics concept on whether this, because you're talking about the three elements, space, time, and what was the other one? I forget. But movement. So basically, ergodicity is whether or not the temporal and spatial averages are the same or not. And the vast majority of analytics is structured to assume that they are, when in fact, in many systems, they are not. And therefore, you get these odd issues about averages aligning, and then you get really outlier kind of unexpected. So one of the things, I had sent this to Alan a while back, is you can think about this through the issue of Russian roulette, right? So the longer you play that game, it all goes to one spot, even though the average outcome is you have a 1 in 6 chance of surviving. Right, so the spatial average of 1 in 6 is different than the temporal average, which is you're dead.
So sorry. Just to answer my own question there, on these average position maps, I've just found the average position map for the Dortmund game. right? And not surprisingly, the team are all over the place. There is no discernible pattern to the lineup at all. But the most fascinating one is, and this must be one of the games where Kyogo maybe touched the ball like once or something in the whole game. And so, according to this map, which leads me to believe it, therefore, it is average position, not mean. He is, by the looks of it, sat on Liam Scales' shoulder. That's his average position. He's actually the furthest player back, just behind Liam's, actually overlapping slightly, just behind Liam Scales. So that answers the question that, on small samples, these are terrible, and they're probably using the wrong thing. And they're using average, not mean. So there you go. But they're still quite interesting.
Yeah, and just to finish this conversation, because I think we're actually leading into my third gripe of the show, is that this is why I think like game intelligence or intelligent players are important, because we're finding more and more, especially in the systematic teams, where you might pluck a player from the Red Bull system and then he goes to, let's say, who's as far away from Red Bull as you can think, maybe Manchester United, and he's terrible. And the reason for that is because he grew up in a system where from Salzburg all the way up to Red Bull, he was playing a system, and he didn't develop a football brain smart enough to think in a chaotic manner that things might not be perfect on the pitch. So this is why I like intelligent players. And there's a conversation going on around Kyogo in terms of, like, does his movement justify his lack of goals at the minute, and bits and pieces like that. But we need players to be able to figure things out on the pitch, because you're never going to have a perfect picture. So Kyogo, I think, is one of those players. Cal McGregor is one of those players. Matt O'Reilly was exceptional at this, was that they were just able to make things happen. If they were in the wrong position, they would get themselves into a position that was not the position they're supposed to be in, but it might cut off a passing lane, or it might create a passing lane. And it's just that high level football IQ that is hard to get at Celtic, because you're not working within the budgets that allow you to get these people in, but you do get gems every now and again. Whereas I think more and more we're seeing players who grow up in systems, learn about where they're supposed to be on the pitch. But then when it comes to chaos, and this is why chaos still works in football, this is why 4-4-2 and Sean Dyche and long ball football still exists, is because some players just can't adapt to chaos. So I think I would take a player who may not be the greatest athlete in the world. I think I would take an intelligent player over him most of the time. But that's just my football philosophy. So I know other people would prefer otherwise. But the thing that I think this sort of leads us on to is the third gripe that I have. And it's not so much a gripe. I thought it was just an interesting conversation with David Sumpter. It was a really interesting guest, because he's been the first high level analytics guy. And I'd listened to this podcast around the same time that I was listening to the audiobook for Ian Graham. And I found the tone at which both men spoke about football analytics wildly different, because I felt that Ian Graham's book, and maybe it was because I was listening to the audiobook, it's how the words came across. I found the tone of his book incredibly sanctimonious and pompous. Whereas I found David Sumpter's admission that there are definite faults within football analytics that only people with years and years of experience within football can see. So the balance between the two, I thought that was David's willingness to admit that there's still serious shortcomings within football analytics was actually quite interesting.
So some of that, obviously, is going to be probably a personality issue specific to the individuals. But I will say, having been in the analytics space for a long time, an applied mathematician is very different generally than a theoretical physicist. So just as far as how they think about things and address things. So I'll throw that in as well. But yeah, I think the other part is, so the more advanced analytics out there, and the stuff that kind of flows downhill. And so we released the Sir David Spiegelhalter interview last week, on the Huddle Breakdown subscription paywall. And this is an advanced statistician, and people at that level, you're talking about distinctions between really, really smart people and what their domain is. And the vast majority, and actually the guy who endowed his chair, the Winton, professorship that he had, is a hedge fund guy, goes way back. And he was one of the first people that started inhaling physicists and math PhDs into Wall Street in like 1995, 1996. So, applied math usually isn't where that real advanced modeling is coming from. It's coming from the more esoteric math and in, the space of physics, particularly theoretical physics. So I'm not, besmirching one over the other. I'm just saying that that's kind of context for why one might have a bit of a different perspective on these things, with Graham versus Sumter, because they are very different animals as far as what their kind of analytical backgrounds are.
Yeah, so there's probably a slightly maybe simplistic but simpler answer in that Ian Graham has found professional success in football. And given the nature of that, the nature of the culture of professional football, the culture of what it takes to be successful in the English Premier League, and all the money, the status, and all of that, never met the guy, never seen him, but there might be a bit of sort of Billy Big Bollocks about all that, right? Whereas David Sumter's a very mild-mannered classic academic, I'm not meaning to patronize or put him down in any way, who's kind of stumbled into a world where people find him interesting talking about football and thinking about football. And he's set up his own football consultancy company, and he's astonished how well it's doing. So that's a very different mindset and a very different perspective on the world. But I'll come back to David Spiegelhalter episode, because if you take away one thing only from that interview, it's when we were talking about the observable versus the non-observable, and he said, basically, whatever you do and whatever findings you present and whatever conclusions you come to, always be humble and always be cautious. Something I doubt that Ian Graham probably is and may well have forgotten that lesson. But that would be something that I would always try and hold with me, and will no doubt fail.
Yeah, and I mean, like, you go into a book written by Ian Graham, and it's called How to Win the Premier League. Like, you're not expecting him to be this humble guy.
I've cracked football. Yeah, it's like, exactly. No, you haven't. Yeah. and I'm not going to read the book. No, you haven't.
Yeah, and it was just I found myself getting more and more frustrated with the idea. He was throwing out all of the success stories that the Liverpool transfer conglomerate, whatever you want to call it, the community or the committee, the council committee. Yeah. All the success stories, but what he fails to leave out is that committee was absolutely ridiculed for 10 years because they were failing miserably on the transfer front. They weren't, and he brings in Brendan Rodgers a couple of times, and that's fine. And obviously the Andy Carroll thing and all that there is, there are definite circumstances that it wasn't totally the committee's fault, but they had a lot of misses as well. And the main one that I kind of had a gripe with was he had labeled the Naby Keita transfer a success story, and that he performed really well when he did play. Naby Keita was an awful player for Liverpool. Like he didn't fit into the system. He never settled in Liverpool. He didn't kick on. He was constantly injured. Like, it was not a success story. So I just found his inability to admit that there's some ones that we thought were going to be great that actually turned out to be a bit shite too. But I think that the main thing that I took from it was that idea that you were mentioning there of being humble and not. I think at times there's an unwillingness for the people like Ian Graham, or not. I'm definitely not throwing this at you two guys, because I don't think you were ever like this. But there is especially with the new data guys, the guys that are entering the data field now, is that it feels almost like they think they are discovering something that was never there, whereas football people knew about this all along. You're just measuring it now. Like, for example, the cutbacks, the low cutbacks into the box. Football people have known about. We know. Like, we have always known that it is a better chance to play the ball low into the box, closer to the goal. The only difference now is we're measuring it, and we always knew. Don't shoot from outside the box. It's a pot shot. You might score a screamer, but it's a pot shot. I have been getting given out to by managers from as low as under 6 to stop taking shots from far out because the chances of scoring are quite low. And I just find at times within the new data community especially is that they think they're discovering something that has always been there and people have known about, but the difference is now you're just measuring it. So that was not so much a gripe with you two guys, but more so a gripe with...
Yeah, I was just saying, I agree with that to a material extent. I mean, if you go back... this comes back to you're absolutely right about characterizing it as an issue of measurement. So that's the first thing. Not only the measurement, but then orders of magnitude, like the degree, like the arithmetic distinction between this versus that. So that comes along with measurement. But yeah, like the better people in any domain, like that's what this is. It's a big pattern recognition machine, and there's a mosaic of people with good skills in that regard, and there are the people that are functionally useless in that regard, and the people like let's say Jock Steen would see stuff like this and make intuitive adjustments because they sensed the measurement in their head. I mean, that's how really smart human beings have functioned for a long time in their domain is you build that kind of intuition. So I agree with you 100%. It's the issue of the scalability of that. And then ultimately, when you really get down to it, it's efficiency, levels of efficiency. Like how can you squeeze more out of something and getting more and more efficient in decision-making and performance levels. So the fundamental concepts absolutely aren't, there's not that much new under the sun. I agree with that 100%.
Yeah, and I think it's a willingness to work with each other as well, because can a football man's decision making become better with the data presented in front of him? 100% it can, but also I think there are intuitive ways that, okay, the data might be showing this, but then you go and watch them and you see that they're actually not performing a function that would suit what you're looking for. The Arne Engels conversation is sort of where this all kind of comes to a head, is that, functionally and from a data perspective, I would say he was quite a good player, but is he the number 8 that people expected coming into Celtic? That's where, maybe football people are thinking otherwise. They're thinking, he's not Matt O'Reilly. And I think the data people are seeing that as well, is that if you were to say, go out and find me a number 8 that can be Matt O'Reilly's replacement, a football person might look at Arne Engels, see something in him that's not quite what Matt O'Reilly is, and then the data person might be able to say that, yeah, well, actually, he's performing a completely different function to him. So if you're looking for a Matt O'Reilly replacement, that's not who you should be looking at. And will we talk about Arne Engels and Cal McGregor? Because that was sort of my 4th gripe for the show. And again, not so much a gripe as a sort of a leading point of the conversation. So Arne Engels getting a lot of stick right now. Of course he is, because why wouldn't he be? He's a 23-year-old who's come in and hasn't scored 50 goals this year so far. So why would we not be writing him off as a dud? But I think Arne Engels is suffering from 3 types of expectation. And one of them is real. Only one of them counts. The first is the expectation around his price tag, because he costs a lot of money. He's going to be a good player. Price tags are meaningless. Price tags are set by the club based on what they perceived to be the lowest value that they would take for this player. And a player is worth how much a team is willing to pay for him. So take Anthony at Manchester United. Is he a 75 million player? No, he's probably more like a 15 million player. But Man United were desperate and useless, and they spent 70 million on him. So Anthony is now worth 70 million. So the same goes for Arne Engels. Just because Celtic paid 11 million for him doesn't mean that's what he's worth. That does not mean that's the talent level. Whatever way you perceive to be an 11 million player, whatever that means in your head, that's irrelevant. That doesn't matter. And the second one is the expectation around Matt O'Reilly and being Matt O'Reilly's replacement. Again, this is something that fans have put on him, when in fact, Rodgers said when Celtic brought him in, he is not Matt O'Reilly's replacement. He is not the same player as Matt O'Reilly. We're not expecting him to do the same thing, and you shouldn't either. But instead of listening to that, Celtic fans have said and have gone with, he's nowhere near as good as Matt O'Reilly, when that's not what he's going to be. That's not what he should be. We shouldn't be measuring him off that fake expectation that we've put him on. But the one thing that I do think he's fallen down, and this is an expectation that's real, and it's one that Kasper Schmeichel mentioned in his interview with Ben Foster's, and that's when you arrive at Celtic, the expectation is on you to win every game and to perform every game. And that's a real expectation that's set by the club and the fans. The fans withhold, like the fans guarantee that they will be unhappy. They're almost the voice of the club when it comes to the expectation of performance, is that you have to win and you have to perform. And Arne Engels has been winning, but he hasn't really been performing all that well. Like a couple of big moments, he hasn't been as bad as people think. I think that's kind of just the way that people have been judging him. But there have been moments where he's been jogging back where he should be sprinting back, where he's lost the ball, and instead of busting a gut to get back, he's sort of like doing that weird snot-nosed European thing where he's got the frown on his face and he never looks overly happy. He's like a stereotypical French player. And there's been moments where he's just you do need to kick up the arse at the same time. Like you're not as bad as people are saying you are right now, but you need to sharpen up. And I think that's more of a Celtic expectation than anything else.
Go ahead, Alan. You have a crack at it first.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think that's a fair observation. I think it's a fair. I've written about this as well. In relation to not just Arne Engels, but actually the whole Celtic midfield at the moment. There's a sort of lingering ghost of O'Reilly that hangs over. And also, actually, and I keep banging this drum, and I'm not going to stop. Even Aaron Moy, who was incredibly useful in the short time that he was here, and we don't. Anyway, Aaron Moy is an incredibly intelligent player. To your point earlier about football intelligence. And actually, Engels isn't as bad as I think maybe he's being painted. I mean, if you took the sort of main three of Bernardo, Hatate, and Engels, who are kind of competing for those number 8 positions, he's got a higher non-penalty XG, he's got a higher expected assist rate. Now, but none of them are at Matt O'Reilly's level. He seems to have the same kind of malaise as Bernardo, in that he doesn't seem to get very involved in the sort of the pack passing side of the game, but he's slightly. Him and Bernardo are about the same, to be honest with you, in that regard. Maybe it's at a very low kind of a low volume, and Hatate unfortunately has regressed. So there's a general malaise, I think, in the midfield, and there's general weaknesses in the midfield, and Engels is kind of. He's a lightning rod for some of that because of his fee, and because he's very obviously not Matt O'Reilly, because he was the last one in the door for that big fee. So I think there's a lot of things going on there. However, having said all that, and I think both O'Reilly and Hatate, when they arrived, spent quite a bit of time on the bench. And those, everyone remembers the first derby and Hatate's 2 goals and all that sort of thing. But you forget sometimes he wasn't always in the team, and he was put on the bench sometimes. And so was O'Reilly. O'Reilly wasn't always first pick in that first 6 months. So there is a bedding in period. There is a settling in period. And what I'm trying to reconcile is the fact that football people clearly see a talented individual in Engels. I mean, I don't think you play for the Belgian. I know they're in a transition at the moment, but I don't think you play for the Belgian national team unless you've got a fair bit about you. Um, but also equally, he was in an Augsburg team, right, that nearly got relegated and was struggling, and he was a regular and he was a first pick, and he kind of filled in holes, but he was mainly playing on the right side of a midfield four, sometimes on the middle of a midfield four. And then in the next season, they had an amazing season. They finished mid-table, which is great for Augsburg. They seem to improve as a team, but he wasn't in it very much. As the season went on, he lost his place in the team, and he was mainly used as a sub, and he was used all over the place. He was kind of sometimes on the left, sometimes on the right, sometimes on the wing, sometimes further back, sometimes in the middle, all that. And since he's been at Celtic, he's also been used in different positions. Sometimes as a left eight, sometimes as a right eight. I think he came on as a 10, not against Dundee United, and he's also filled in for Callum McGregor as a 6. So that I don't personally feel that's doing him any favors. Not because he may not be capable of doing that, but just the evidence of my eyes suggests we're not getting a consistency of performance, and therefore, why don't you move one of the major variables, which is asking him to do lots of different jobs? Why don't you try and get him to do one job, get him to do it well, and then you'll build his confidence and his consistency. But I think there's also, even having said all that, there's a fundamental concern, which is that he's simply just not. I don't see any evidence, virtually no evidence, that he's played in a football team that plays like Celtic and can play like Celtic number 8 plays, i.e., quick, short passing football, on the ball a lot, not having to do so much defending, therefore playing quite far forward, having to press and do it very aggressively, and get into the box a lot. I've not seen any evidence that's the role he's played in any of his previous clubs, and that to me is a big concern, because I'm not seeing any evidence he's adapting well to that. And that would be my biggest concern. But I think there's a lot of other things going on around it, and I think we could make it a lot easier for him.
Well, that's where I bring in the expectation of playing for Celtic. Is like it's a lot different playing for Celtic than it is playing for Augsburg. The expectation is not that. I'm not saying that for Augsburg you can turn up and not do your job, but if you turn up for Augsburg and you're expected to defend, it's a lot easier to do that than it is to dominate the game and cement your place in the team and be an outstanding player on the ball. Like it's a completely different function. You can to an extent put in a 6 out of 10 performance when your back's against the wall and defending, because you don't actually have to do much with the ball. You just have to be positionally smart. Whereas with Celtic, you need to be everything. You need to be positionally smart. You need to be good on the ball. You need to be able to take it on the half turn. And it's funny though, because like defensively has been where I've been most frustrated with Arne Engels. And maybe it's because he's not used to being that pivot role, the number 8, where he's taking the ball out of defense, that when he does lose that ball, his turn of pace to get back and actually chase that player back and win the ball back, that's where I've been probably the least impressed with him, because maybe he's playing deeper. But I don't know, like long-term thinking, I'm thinking maybe I'm out my own here, but if I were planning long-term and I had the money at the disposal that Celtic had, I wouldn't be trying to replace Matt O'Reilly as opposed to replacing Cal McGregor in 2 years' time when the inevitable drop-off comes. So I'm thinking, like, maybe I'm giving the club too much credit here, but is there potential for Arne Engels to be Cal McGregor's replacement as opposed to Matt O'Reilly's replacement? Because he does play that deeper role. He's better at receiving the ball and playing within tight triangles rather than taking the ball, turning, and progressing the ball forward. He's also quite good at carrying the ball. That's one thing you can definitely see in his stride. He's very comfortable carrying the ball forward. So that to me screams Cal McGregor more than it does Matt O'Reilly.
I was and continue to be extremely concerned about the signing, not only from a Celtic perspective, but I worry about him as a young man because of everything that you reference, Enda, the pressure, the unfairness of the situation that he's been placed, rational or irrational, unfair or fair. He's going to get hanged with that scarlet letter as Matt O'Reilly's replacement. And, I get why people do it. Like, it's a common kind of human thing to think that way. And the price tag is what the price tag is. And I mean, just, when I take my spreadsheet shagging douchebag hat off and just think as a normal human being, it's like, yeah, you know what? If it's a club record signing, and that was not by a small amount, that was like 11 million's a lot. That was a statement signing. One would think that a statement signing would be Matt O'Reilly. Meaning, and I don't mean that literally in the sense of Matt O'Reilly. I mean literally, I mean figuratively, relative to his profile and to how obvious it was to see him as a success at Celtic. As soon as Alan and I looked at him and said, "Man, this guy is exciting! Like, look at his profile coming. Yeah, it was out of League One, but man, like this is going to be good. Like, well, we're maybe worried he's not that fast, but man, he looks like a smart player and he's creative and he's got an engine and he's managing his career well and all this other stuff." So when I looked at Engels, I had none of that. I had the immediate thought that went into my head is, what the hell are we doing? Like, I just don't get it. I don't get it. I haven't gotten it. What I think could have happened this is like a bad profiling classification of pace and power, meaning that we need pace and power, so let's get this guy and get him in our midfield. That's the only thing I can come up with, because other than that, I don't see really much in his profile that suggests that he would adapt. As Alan said, like, there's no evidence of it, and you have to make some inferences in his data profile going back to his Club Brugge 2 time, where there's a season of data, which he played in a long ball side, by the way, which is weird. Why Club Brugge were running their bottom of the table junior team effectively as a long ball side. That's a whole other conversation. So I just feel bad for him, because I think he might be set up for failure in a sense of expectations, right? So he could end up being a very positive contributing player, but we could probably get that for like a third of that price, and not have that comparison to Matt O'Reilly. As to your positional thing, and this is why I'm very concerned, is this, and I mentioned earlier about this issue, and very I find one of the most fascinating aspects is profile relative to role. If we're going to have a kind of a sole pivot primarily in build-up, which is what McGregor allows us to do for the most part, because of how good he is in movement and on the ball. It's why everyone's trying to man mark him out of the game, right? So there's a reason that teams try to take him away. I don't see that skill set, or likely to be, with somebody like Engels or Bernardo. Like, they're not dynamic enough. They're not fluid enough. They're not as technically good enough on even the short passes, making that decision making. Like, they have too many brain farts, the Hatate brain farts, these kind of just what we see with Taylor at times, like the propensity of that at a rate. That's what makes McGregor, and has made McGregor, so good in this role, in my view, specifically in this phase of play of buildup, is that he's very reliable in that role. So obviously, when you turn the ball over in that space as a single pivot, it's big time problem, right? Because you basically have an onslaught directly at your goal with very little in between. So I can't envision him as a sole six. Could we change shape and then he's part of a two? Would that, is that ideal? I'm still thinking probably not, but it might suit him better than what we've been doing. But again, should we be changing how we want to play based off of our record signing because he's deficient in some of these ways? I think that would be crazy. So this is, again, back to this issue, is I just don't think it was a good fit to begin with. Alan, you want to chime in?
Yeah, just I don't necessarily disagree with your conclusion. I just don't agree with you for the same reason. So, because to me, in the same way is you didn't replace Scott Brown with Callum McGregor, by saying to Cal McGregor, be Scott Brown. You're not going to replace Cal McGregor with player X and tell him you've got to be like Cal McGregor, right? It's just not going to happen. There's not many players around like Cal McGregor. I don't mean that as in like he's some sort of world beater. I just mean not many players play the specific skill set and role that he plays. Most number sixes are of slightly different skill sets, and therefore I'm still skeptical that either Bernardo or Engels could be functional number sixes. But I do think there's utility in it, and if they were to play those roles, I don't expect them to be Callum McGregor. I suppose that's the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah, and I think the point that I would make is Cal McGregor wasn't Cal McGregor 5 years ago. You know what I mean? He was a different player to what he is now, and he didn't perform the same function. And the difference is that's where the game intelligence comes in. You can ask a Cal McGregor, can you play number 6? Yes, and then he made that position his own in a unique, different Cal McGregor type way. And that's probably more so what I'm expecting from players who play in Germany or come in for a higher price line, is that game intelligence. And it's the question now is, can Arne Engels adapt to whatever role that he's given? He's still quite young. I know 23 is not, like, relatively speaking, young for elite football, but in terms of where he's at, I would still call him a pretty young player. And the biggest issue with young players is that it's never really a technical issue so much as it is an awareness and a spatial issue. And it comes back to sort of the movement, the time and the space. Things are done quicker, things are done differently. You need to sharpen up, you need to speed things up. Everything needs to be turned up by 100 based on what you've been playing. Similar enough to what Arne Engels is expecting to move the ball now in comparison to Augsburg. And then positionally, you just need to know where you're supposed to be on the pitch. And I find Arne Engels doesn't really know that quite yet. He doesn't really, like, for example, when we had Matt O'Reilly playing in that number 8 role, if he dropped into the channel into midfield and received the ball off Alistair Johnson, I would say with a blindfold, he could play the pass that he's supposed to play. And most of us would know where that ball is going because we've seen him do it time and time and again, because this is it's a play that Celtic do. It's basically a playbook. Whereas with Arne Engels, especially in the Champions League, you're seeing him, instead of playing the ball around the corner or being on the half turn or getting his body shape right in anticipation of where this ball is supposed to go, he's taken a touch, he's back towards the goal, and the only option he has is play it back to the fullback, and then Celtic are pinned in if they're playing against the high press. So I think everything just needs to be turned up a notch with Arne Engels going forward. But we'll move on to my final gripe, and it's not so much a gripe as it is. It kind of ties in with the analytics discussion we had earlier, and in that there are some things that analytics don't measure, right? And I'm calling this is such a bulky title, but I think it's suitable to a show like this, where it's just like, design has never been the strong point of analytics. So I think the long title is suitable to it. I'm calling it The Art of Doing Something Without the Intention of It Being Successful. Do you guys want to hazard a guess of what I mean by that before I explain?
My sex life? I don't know. Go ahead.
Always
throw one in.
Always you with the sex life. Always.
It's always goes. Get your head out of the dirt.
No, deking. We would say like a false move. Trying to create doubt in the opposition's decision making and try to counter. So you're almost like a false flag operation type of thing.
Yeah, so I would say if you said to, and let's call them new data guys because I don't want to label the entire community like this. I would say if you said to them, what do you think if a player got the ball on the halfway line and played a long cross looping over the defense? They would say that's a wasted ball. Giving the ball back to the opposition, you've got a low chance of scoring from that. There's no point in doing it, so just cut it out as much as possible. But for me, it's about balance, because if the opposition knows that every time you get the ball, you're going to get to the byline, you're going to cut it back, what are they going to do? They're going to block that off. They're going to block the channel off. And this is how tactics evolve, right? So, one team does something a lot. It's really successful. Other teams copy it. and then somebody tries to find a way to stop it. So it's the constant evolution of football. And sometimes you have to do something without the intention of it ever being to be successful. So you might play a long looping cross over the defense, and the intention is not to score. The intention is not even to find a man. The intention is to catch the defense out, keep them on their toes. Think that, oh shit, I thought he was going to run the channel. Now I'm a little bit confused, now I'm a little bit scared. And I'm not saying that you can run a functioning football system based on only doing the unexpected. I suppose some people do. It's like the chaos theory. But say, for example, you take a shot from outside of the box. Sometimes the intention of that is not to score. Sometimes the intention of that is, there's loads of bodies here. This could go anywhere and it could fall to a player. It's like a third step. It's that thing where you're doing it. You're not intending for the supposed outcome for it, but the chaos of you doing it leads to something else. And I think this comes down to the idea of movement as well, is that players, you can't really perceive it unless you pay attention to one player at a time. You can't really watch it unless you're just watching. But I think the best players, probably the number 10s at this, is some people move into positions not to receive the ball. The intention is never to receive the ball, but that movement creates space for somebody else to move into position where they can move the ball. And by the initial movement, that pulls a player out of position and that creates space, and it's all intertwined. But the intention is never to receive the ball. So it's, again, that's where I'm coming in with, the intention is never to be successful with, I'm moving here, so therefore I get the ball. That's not why I'm moving there. I'm moving there to do something else.
Well, so I'll address first is, and this goes back to part of the conversation that we had with David Sumter, was when you're talking about such a strongly held culture and kind of ecosystem of football. You think about this, micro. So if you're looking at that one cross and that one pass, you could have someone in analytics or looking at data and say, oh, well, the expected value of that cross sucks on a micro basis, right? But if you look at it at a macro basis, if you're playing Barnsley Skyball, which is exactly what you're talking about, Enda, that kind of, I'm trying to optimize. So this is back to this issue of, measurement, data, analytics, judgment, decision-making. This is why when we talked with Sir Spiegelhalter about AI a little bit, I asked him, because this is an issue that they're having with AI. It's not, in my view, they're not going to get general intelligence. To me, it's going to end up being like alchemy. They're going to pursue it for a long time. Really, really smart people pursuing it. And ultimately, they're going to realize it's impossible. Is that, you can have data, you can have models, but ultimately you need this thing of the human brain to say, hey, like, does this make sense or not? Because we talk about it all the time. Measurements, there are issues. All models are wrong. All of this, right? So it's an issue of being smart and optimization. So that cross can by itself. This was, if you watched, as many people did in lockdown, The Last Dance with the Bulls with Jordan. The analytics community realized, oh wow, like Dennis Rodman, the Bulls actually score more points when Dennis Rodman's on the court, even though this guy doesn't do crap offensively. Well, how is that minus whatever he was offensively unleashing the plus over here? So that's a more of a system macro perspective. So these things can be reconciled, and analytics and data can be used. It's about being smart and what are you actually optimizing for, and can you execute it and get buy-in? Because the human element, as long as we've been doing this, we get understandably labeled as the nerds and the people that only look at the stats, which is a pet peeve, obviously, because it's ridiculous. That's not the case. And Alan, I've always said the most important part of all of this is the people using this crap, because you can give all this data, get the most expensive data, most expensive models. And if you have people that don't know what they're doing with it, they're going to waste it and actually maybe do more harm than good. So I think the issue of measurement that you're referencing, there's stuff that will never be able to be measured, i.e. intent. That's a good example. Like you can't read people's minds, obviously, but a lot of it is still like we're in like the S curve of the industry, as I call it. Like, when baseball moved from Moneyball to now they have these optical cameras measuring everything, like that opened up a whole second wave of analytics, good, bad, and indifferent. I mean, a lot of it was bad. They've had to change the rules literally to compensate for how much the analytics with this advanced data changed how people were playing, because it turned it into a putrid eyesore to watch shifts and all this other stuff. Is the tracking data and the merging of tracking data with event data. And that's still happening. Like even David Sumpner mentioned that, like getting access to it, it's not ubiquitous. We don't have it for Scotland, for example. I'm not aware of any centralized vendor. Y-Scouts now, Huddle that bought StatsBomb that also has Y-Scout. They've now launched it where you get some tracking data for the big 5 leagues going back a couple of seasons. So that'll make it better. So you'll be able to measure more, optimize more, but it's the same structural problem, which is you still have to be smart. You still have to use it in an intelligent way inside an ecosystem of skepticism, deeply entrenched bias and culture, which just makes it really, really hard because you inevitably fall back on this stuff like, this is the way we've always done it. And, you get a club like Celtic that have had a lot of success, particularly domestically. Why are you going to take risk to do something different and take a leap of faith with some theoretical physicist who's telling you their model tells you to do this? When you say, hey, look at the trophy cabinet, dummy. I think we're doing just fine.
Well, what's interesting is that it's sort of like it's like the right and left in America right now is that if they would just talk, they would realize they actually have so much more in common than they do apart. And I think that's what's funny about football men, quote unquote football men and data men, is if they had a conversation, most of them would come to the exact same conclusion about how football should be played. It's like the data people are telling you almost exactly what you know intuitively. So like you are agreeing. The difference is how you got to that agreement is different. It's like one is measuring it through tools and data and, seeing things on a piece of paper, whereas you're seeing it on the football pitch. The conclusion's largely going to be the same. And I think that's where we come down to, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that's because you don't have radical enough analytics people. That's
yeah, not radical enough. But it comes down to the good versus bad perception, which is, it's my general word gripe with football is that people think there's good and bad football. And yeah, like there's badly played football. That is a thing that exists. Is Celtic versus Dundee United at the weekend is an example of that. But there is no such thing as good versus bad tactics. It's how you perform within those tactics. It's like one thing that the main issue I have is when people look back at the Manchester United winning treble team, and they look at the football they played and they're like, God, this is terrible. I mean, they would be awful in this current league system. They would get torn apart. Look, they only played 4-4-2. They crossed the ball long the entire time. It's like, yeah, but they had fucking David Beckham on the right wing. Of course they crossed it. Like, what are you what do you mean they crossed it? Of course they did. They had the best deliverer of the ball in the world, paired up with the best movement in the world with the other players. Of course they did that. I mean, that's where your optimization comes in. It's like they weren't playing bad football. They won the treble, for God's sake. They optimized for the players they had.
Right. And that is where the dumbness of analytics comes in, which is the lack of recognition of the distribution. Right. And how everything just goes back to the conversation on ergodic or not, partly, which is what is the distribution and where are you at on the distribution? We everything's bogged down in averages or median so much as if, I call them maxis. right? This is like the XG maxis that everything mean reverts, everything's a Monte Carlo simulation, everything's a normally distributed distribution. And that's just not the way that the actual world works. That does happen sometimes. Some systems are like that, but the vast majority of them are not. So this goes back to this issue of being smart and being able to deploy some of this stuff in an intelligent way. So yeah, David Beckham on your right does make a difference, just like, Lionel Messi, just like, if you have any of these outliers, people are really, really good at something, it's usually a pretty good idea to have them do what they're good at. And this goes back to, I think, still one of the arbitrages that's not well exposed, and that like Bloom is taking advantage of it, particularly in the transfer market, is the fit of a player's profile with the roles within the team strategy and getting that synchronicity right. Because then that makes players look actually more valuable than they are, because it's the synergy effect that goes up and down from all these players all being, smartly deployed in a coherent way, making them all look good. And then all of a sudden they go out of that environment. And you're like, what the hell happened to this guy? He sucks now. No, actually he didn't. I call that the inverse Sam Lammers. So he was horrible at Rangers playing a number 10 role. And then he goes into Belgium, I think it is, or wherever the hell he is. And he's actually like a productive member of a European, football club. It's like, boy, I thought he sucked. Well, no, your recruitment sucked. You didn't know how to play him. You didn't know how to use him. He's actually just what he is. He's a guy with some talents and some strengths and some weaknesses. And if you put him in the right conditions and you treat him right, he's probably going to perform like most employees will, or most workers, or most, people in life that want to like accomplish things and, enjoy themselves at work, that kind of thing. So
I was going to say, I think the answer to your question is actually, to recap some of the topics we've already covered. I think he actually covers it quite well. So, you started with this notion, and which I really like, by the way, of the sort of, the triangle of time, space, and movement. I like it because it reminds me of the old, project management triangle of time, money, and scope. And if you want to deliver something, all three of these things have got to be in harmony. Well, it's the same with football tactics. All these things have got to be in harmony. And so I think, and I think James said earlier, you mentioned Jock Stein because it's on our minds because we've been recording the 67 podcasts, etc. But I think great managers instinctively, without having any knowledge of analytics or stats or data, I think great managers understand probability, even though they probably left school at 15. They understand the principles of probability instinctively. And so, to your point about, well, why did they do that? Well, let's look at Celtic in the League Cup final on Sunday. Around about the 15th minute, they started launching the ball long over the back of the Rangers defence. And why did they do that? They actually did get some chances, but they weren't expecting necessarily to get chances from it. But what they wanted to do was try and force the team backwards because they were pressing them so high and they were playing such a high line. You want to keep the defence honest by making them drop back a little bit, and then that gives you more space, one of your three on your triangle, for you then to move into one of the others, and it probably gives you more time when you get the ball if you can stretch their defence a little bit. So you launch balls over the top, and a smart manager knows this, right? So all tactics need to have that element of it, which is why the sort of the mini Guardiolas and what have you see on a Sunday morning that get the team to go pass, is I think it's great because the kids getting loads of touches of the ball, and it's a good way for kids to play football. But if you want to develop into a proper football team, you've got to have a lot more tools in your toolbox, and you've got to understand when and why to use them. And great managers will do that. They'll instill in their team, without mentioning the word probability, but they'll instill in their team, well, if we do this, the probability is they're going to drop back a bit, and therefore we'll have more of our virtuous triangle. We'll be able to fulfill. So I think you've kind of answered your own question in a way as we've kind of gone through this today.
Yeah, this was like a therapy session of my football philosophy. I don't often get to. In fact, over the last 7 months, I haven't got to speak to one person who cares about what I'm talking about when it comes to football. So,
is that because of the language barrier in Australia? What language do they speak down there?
Bogan.
Yeah.
Racism.
It's kind of guttural, kind of. Yeah. Oh, we're going to get into so much trouble with our lovely Australian subscribers.
No, I'm only messing. They're lovely people out here. But
I thought there was a big Melbourne Celtic Supporters Club, isn't there? You're still in Melbourne.
I'm only around the corner from the Cross pub, which is I think it's owned by Scottish people, and you can get pints attendance and you can watch the match, and it's a nice spot to watch Celtics thump Rangers in each and every game that we seem to come across them. But I thought the interesting conversation around football tactics is not one that I've been able to have. Just finally, on Tony Bloom, the point I was going to make is that he's basically just a used Volvo salesman who's selling these cars to people who want Ferraris. That's what he is. He's selling reliable, good, strong. You buy it for the function. Yeah. Is it fulfilling that function? Yeah. Can I take it on the racetrack? Well, no, you'll get absolutely demolished. That's what Tony Bloom's doing at Brighton, and that's probably my fundamental problem with football at the minute. Is it's great for Brighton. It's great for these clubs who can pull themselves up with really smart movement and really smart changes within their systems and creating a structure. But I think the fallback is then you do end up with less intelligent footballers overall. I think the world of football will always have intelligent footballers because they just spring out of nowhere. But I think you do need people who have football brains. Like it's funny. Like you'll watch a superstar. Let's take Michael Owen, for example. He won the Ballon d'Or, so I think it's fair enough you could call him a superstar at the time. Try get him to explain anything to do with football. He doesn't know why he's doing it. He just knows that this is what he's supposed to. It's the same with Robbie Keane is a great example of this. Ireland's top goal scorer ever. Like one could theoretically assume that this guy who was so good at moving around the pitch to get himself into position would be a smart top football brain. And when you listen to him talk about football, he does not know why there was no logic in his head. There was nothing telling him that this is where I have to be. It was just pure instinct. And so you have to have a mix of these players who play off instinct. Some have a football brain, and then you do need the functional worker bees as well that you get from these systems. So balance is probably the keys theme of this podcast.
That's right. Fitting those pieces together. That's where the frontier is, and how to use some of this stuff. Well, Enda, this has been terrific. It's great to reconnect. Do not be a stranger. You're welcome back anytime.
Before we finish up, James.
No, I saw you've been cheating on us with Hamish on occasion.
I know.
You guys go off to Australia and you start having your affairs. This romanticism that takes place. I tell you, we're aware of it, but that doesn't mean we don't love you.
Before we finish up, the one last thing that I have to bring up is that there's a quote from the US office where Michael says, how the turntables, and I just wanted to, as somebody who caused the chaos on Celtic Twitter that day, the turns have tabled on the Rio Hatate conversation. I just wanted to point that out, that there are now the exact same people who were calling us virgins and calling us pricks and everything under the sun, saying that Hatate is not consistent enough to play in the Champions League. So I just wanted to mention that.
All right. Way to spike the ball in the end zone to use a U.S. football saying. But thanks again, Enda. It's been terrific, and we will be in touch in the not too distant future, hopefully.
Yeah, I'm looking to put another extension onto this, so whenever you can get
a West Wing, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. Right. Thanks, guys.